A luxurious yacht, a toast between partners and a dark plan in the middle of the sea. When betrayal becomes inevitable, only an unexpected hero defies the waters and changes everything. The full moon illuminated the crystal-clear waters of Newport Bay, creating a silver mirror that reflected Richard Blackwell's luxurious yacht. The 28-meter vessel cut smoothly through the waves as the party on board reached its peak. The guests, all influential business people and investors in the maritime sector, circulated with champagne flutes, immersed in conversations about numbers, opportunities, and, of course, money. Leaning against the railing of the main deck, Coleman observed the scene with a serious expression. His perceptive eyes studied every movement of Richard, his business partner of more than 15 years. At his side, Max, a golden Labrador with attentive eyes, remained alert, as if sharing his owner's concerns. "Are you okay?" asked Sophia, the event organizer, noticing Tyler's worried expression. "You seem distant tonight." Tyler forced a smile, adjusting himself in his wheelchair. "Just tired." "Hey, it's been an intense week," he replied, stroking Max's head, who kept his eyes fixed on Richard. Sophia followed the dog's gaze and smiled. "Max is acting strange today, isn't he? I've never seen him so restless." "He's sensitive to mood changes," explained Tyler, diverting the subject. "He notices things that we humans sometimes take longer to pick up on." As Sophia walked away to attend to other guests, Tyler took a deep breath. Inside the hidden compartment in Max's collar was the flash drive with all the evidence he had collected over months: suspicious transfers, inflated contracts, accounts in tax havens, an elaborate scheme that explained the dramatic growth of Richard's wealth in recent years. Across the deck, Richard Blackwell raised his glass toward Tyler in a silent toast. His confident smile concealed any trace of guilt or concern. To those present, it was just another cordial gesture between successful partners. To Tyler, it was almost a provocation. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Richard, taking center stage in the main salon. "Tonight is special, not only because we're celebrating the 15th anniversary of Blackwell and Coleman Navigation, but also because we're about to announce an unprecedented expansion." The guests applauded enthusiastically. Tyler kept his hands motionless on his lap, exchanging a meaningful look with Isabella Duarte, his secretary and trusted confidant who had infiltrated the party at his request. "With strategic investments and international partnerships," Richard continued, "we're about to become the largest maritime tourism company in North America." More applause. Tyler felt his stomach turn. Each of Richard's words now sounded false to his ears. He wanted to stand up and reveal everything right there in front of everyone, but he knew he needed to be cautious. A public confrontation would be disastrous, not only for the company, but for all the employees who depended on it. When the speech ended and the guests began to disperse across the yacht, Tyler maneuvered his wheelchair toward Richard. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Alone." Richard raised his eyebrows but maintained his unwavering smile. "Of course, my friend. Let's go to my personal office." As they headed to the lower part of the yacht, Max remained at Tyler's side, his posture tense and protective. The dog had been trained after the accident that left Tyler paraplegic 6 years earlier, and since then had become more than a companion. He was a guardian. "Any problem?" asked Richard as he closed the office door behind him. His voice sounded relaxed, but his eyes were alert. Tyler positioned his chair facing him and took a deep breath. It was the moment he had prepared for months. "I know everything, Richard," he declared, maintaining eye contact with his partner, "about the embezzlement, the ghost accounts, the inflated contracts with foreign shipyards." Richard's expression remained impassive for a few seconds until a contained laugh escaped his lips. "Tyler, my friend, you've been watching too many police dramas. What exactly are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," Tyler retorted, his voice firmer. "I have enough evidence to sink you. I'm giving you a chance to explain before I take more drastic measures." The mask of cordiality on Richard's face began to slowly dissolve. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard looked away toward the window, where the trembling Reflection of the moon could be seen on the dark waters. His fingers drummed on the polished surface of the mahogany desk in a nervous rhythm that contradicted his apparent calm. "What evidence would that be, Tyler?" he finally asked, with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I understand that you're concerned about the direction of the company, but these accusations are serious." Tyler moved his wheelchair closer to the desk and removed an envelope. From inside his jacket, bank statements, copies of altered contracts, records of meetings you had with people who shouldn't even be involved in our business, he explained, spreading some documents on the desk. "I've been tracking your steps for months, Richard. I know you're embezzling money from the company." Max, who had remained quiet at Tyler's side, began to growl softly, his eyes fixed on Richard. The Labrador could sense the growing tension in the room. "Quiet, Max," ordered Tyler, stroking the dog's golden fur to calm him. Richard slowly rose from his chair and walked to a small bar in the corner of the office. He poured himself a whiskey, the clinking of ice against glass momentarily breaking the silence. "You've always been intelligent, Tyler, since college when we met," he commented with his back to his partner. "But sometimes your intelligence puts you in complicated situations." He turned with the glass in hand, his countenance completely transformed. The mask of cordiality had disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "What exactly do you intend to do with this information?" he questioned, approaching dangerously. Tyler remained firm, though he felt a shiver run down his spine. "I want you to confess everything, return the money, and step away from the company," he responded with conviction. "Otherwise, I'll take everything to the authorities." Richard laughed, a humorless sound that seemed to echo through the office. "You really believe you can threaten me like this? Think carefully, Tyler. Who has more to lose here? The company we built would take a terrible blow if these accusations came to light. Are you willing to risk everything, including the jobs of hundreds of people?" "Don't try to reverse the situation," retorted Tyler, feeling anger growing inside him. "The one responsible for all this is you, not me." Max was now completely alert, the fur on his neck bristling, as if sensing imminent danger. Richard noticed the dog's reaction and took a few steps back. "Maybe we're both a bit too worked up to discuss this now," he suggested, partially resuming his conciliatory tone. "It's a party after all. Why don't we go back upstairs, enjoy the rest of the evening, and continue this conversation tomorrow with cooler heads?" Tyler hesitated. Confronting Richard in the middle of a social event wasn't his initial plan, but the opportunity had arisen, and he had taken it. Perhaps it would be prudent to back down now and rethink his approach. "Tomorrow then," he finally agreed. "But don't think I'm going to forget this, Richard, and to make sure, I have several copies of this evidence in safe places." Of course," replied Richard, opening the office door. "I wouldn't expect any less from you, my friend." When Tyler maneuvered his chair to leave, he felt Richard's hand on his shoulder, a touch that would seem friendly to any observer, but contained her veiled threat. "Just a piece of advice, Tyler," Richard whispered, leaning in. "Some waters are deeper than they appear. Be careful not to drown." Back on the main deck, the party continued lively. No one seemed to have noticed the absence of the two partners. Isabella discreetly approached Tyler, concern evident in her gaze. "How did it go?" she asked in a low voice. "Exactly as we expected," replied Tyler, watching Richard mix with the guests again as if nothing had happened. "He's cornered, but he's dangerous." Isabella nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Is the flash drive safe?" "In Max's collar," confirmed Tyler. "No one would suspect a dog." The Labrador, as if understanding they were talking about him, proudly raised his head. His protective instinct was on high alert, especially when he noticed Richard observing them from afar, with a look that didn't match the smile he displayed for the other guests. "I don't trust him," muttered. "Isabella, I think we should get out of here as soon as possible," Tyler agreed. The initial confrontation had been made, and remaining on the yacht now would be imprudent. "I'll make up an excuse and ask one of the support boats to take me back to the marina," he decided. "Meanwhile, keep an eye on Richard. I want to know his every move." Isabella nodded and discreetly moved away. Tyler took a deep breath, preparing to put his plan into action. He didn't imagine, however, that Richard was already articulating his counter-offensive, one that would forever change the course of their lives. Tyler signaled to one of the crew members that he would need to leave the party. The man nodded and began preparing one of the smaller boats to transport him back to the marina. While waiting, he observed the movement on the deck with increased attention. Richard was now animatedly conversing with a group of foreign investors, but Tyler noticed that his eyes occasionally turned in his direction. The sky, previously starry, began to cloud over, as if anticipating the storm that was to come. The waters, previously calm, stirred slightly, making the yacht rock in an almost imperceptible manner. Max, always attentive to changes, remained glued to Tyler's side, his alert eyes constantly scanning the surrounding environment. "Mr. Coleman, your boat is ready," informed the crew member, approaching respectfully. "But I suggest you reconsider your departure. The weather is changing rapidly, and the forecast is for a storm in the next few hours." Tyler looked at the sky and then at Richard, considering which danger would be greater. "I appreciate the concern, but I really need to return," he insisted. "Max isn't feeling well, and I have important commitments early tomorrow." The crew member nodded, although his expression made it clear he didn't consider it a wise decision. As they maneuvered toward the elevator that would give access to the lower deck, where the support boat was docked, Isabella quickly approached. "He just made a suspicious call," she murmured, leaning as if helping Tyler with something on his chair. "He asked someone to prepare Plan B and mentioned that you were leaving the yacht." Tyler felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Richard well enough to know the man wouldn't accept defeat easily. "Come with me," he invited, holding Isabella's arm. "It's not safe for you to stay here after I leave." Isabella hesitated for a moment. "If we leave together, he'll be even more suspicious. Besides, I can continue observing him and keeping you informed," she argued. "I have some friends at this party. I'll be fine." Reluctantly, Tyler accepted Isabella's reasoning. He headed for the lower deck, with Max always by his side. As he descended in the elevator, he couldn't help but feel he was walking into a trap. But the direct confrontation with Richard had precipitated events. Now the only option was to move forward with the plan. On the lower deck, the crew had already prepared the speedboat that would take him back to the coast. The sea was more agitated there, the waves hitting against the yacht's hull with increasing force. One of the sailors helped Tyler transfer from the wheelchair to the boat's seat, while another accommodated the chair in the small cargo compartment. "Max, come on," called Tyler, patting the seat next to him lightly. The Labrador, however, remained, motionless at the edge of the yacht, growling softly at the shadows of the upper deck, his eyes fixed on a specific point, as if detecting a threatening presence. "What is it, boy?" asked Tyler, following the dog's gaze, but unable to distinguish anything in the dimness. At that moment, a figure emerged from the shadows. Richard, with an unreadable expression on his face. "Leaving so soon, partner?" he asked, descending the stairs with the calculated elegance of a predator. "The party has barely begun." Tyler tensed. Richard's unexpected presence confirmed his suspicions that something wasn't right. "As I said, I have commitments in the morning," he responded cautiously. "Besides, the weather is worsening." Richard approached the edge, looking at the speedboat already prepared and the sailors waiting for instructions. "You two can give us a moment," he ordered the crew members, who exchanged uncertain glances before moving toward the bow of the yacht. As soon as they were relatively alone, Richard turned to Tyler, all pretense of cordiality gone. "You really believe you can just walk out of here and destroy everything we've built?" he hissed, leaning dangerously. "What you built was a fraud, Richard," retorted Tyler, keeping his voice low but firm, "and I have no intention of allowing it to continue." Richard's eyes gleamed with contained fury. "You know what your problem is, Tyler. You've always been too confident in your sense of justice, that moral superiority." He paused, moving even closer. "But the truth is that you depend on me. You always have since the accident. Who kept the company running while you were in that hospital bed? Who made sure your precious empire didn't crumble?" "Don't distort history," warned Tyler, feeling anger rising within him. I worked twice as hard after the accident to compensate for my physical limitations, and it wasn't out of gratitude that you kept me as a partner. It was because you needed my reputation to attract investors. A distant thunder reverberated, as if underlining the tension of the moment. Max, who had positioned himself protectively between Tyler and Richard, emitted a more audible growl, partially showing his teeth. "Control that dog," ordered Richard, taking a step back. "He senses when I'm threatened," replied Tyler calmly, "and at this moment, I am." The two men stared at each other in silence, decades of partnership and friendship disintegrating in a matter of hours. The light of a lightning bolt briefly illuminated their faces, revealing the determination of one and the fury of the other. "This is your last chance, Tyler," warned Richard, his voice almost inaudible over the growing roar of the sea. "Forget what you think you discovered, and we can move forward as we always have." "You know I can't do that." Richard nodded slowly, as if already expecting this answer. "Then you leave me no choice," he murmured, more to himself than to Tyler. Tense silence settled between the two, filled only by the noise of waves hitting against the yacht's hull and by the wind that began to howl between the cables. The clouds now completely covered the sky, swallowing the stars and the moon, plunging the deck into an unsettling dimness. "The sailors are waiting," said Tyler finally, breaking the silence. "I'd better go." When he made a motion to turn and call the crew, he felt Richard's hand grab his arm with surprising force. "You know what they say about secrets, Tyler," whispered Richard, his face now inches from his former friends. "The best ones are those that never come to light." Before Tyler could react, Richard violently pushed the wheelchair backwards. The unexpected movement made Tyler lose his balance. For a terrible moment, he felt himself floating in the air, the yacht's lights spinning above him as his body fell toward the dark sea. The impact with the water was like an electric shock. Despite the warm night, the sea was freezing, and the current, stronger than it seemed from the surface, immediately began to pull him down. His immobile legs made it impossible to swim properly, and the weight of his soaked clothes only complicated the situation. Above him, he heard Max's desperate bark, and then another splash when the Labrador, without hesitation, jumped to his rescue. The sailors, attracted by the noise, ran back to the deck, finding only Richard with an expression of staged horror. "He fell! Tyler fell into the sea!" he shouted, pointing to the agitated waters. "Quick, we need to rescue him!" While the crew mobilized in an apparent search, Richard smiled internally. The fall of someone in a wheelchair into the sea would easily be attributed to an accident amid the agitation of the waves, his word against no one's. In the water, Tyler struggled to stay on the surface. Each time he managed to emerge for air, a new wave pushed him back down. Darkness enveloped him, and for a terrible moment he thought that would be his end. It was then that he felt something grab his shirt. Max had reached him and was now pulling with all the strength of his canine, muscles trying to keep him afloat. "Good boy," murmured Tyler, clinging to the animal's wet fur. "Good boy." Together, man and dog fought against the current, but the marina was too far away and both were beginning to exhaust their strength. Above them, the yacht's lights seemed increasingly distant, and Tyler realized with growing despair that Richard had probably ordered them to continue sailing, deliberately moving away from the site of the accident. As they floundered in the agitated waters, a beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping the surface of the sea. At first, Tyler thought it was a hallucination caused by the lack of oxygen, but soon he heard the rumble of an engine approaching. Rapidly, There's someone in the water!" shouted an unknown voice. A Coast Guard boat patrolling the region due to the storm warning had detected the unusual movement in the water. Within minutes, strong hands were pulling Tyler and Max into the rescue vessel. "Are you all right, sir?" asked one of the officers, wrapping him in a thermal blanket. "How did you fall into the sea?" Tyler coughed, expelling salt water from his lungs while trying to reorganize his thoughts. Max, exhausted but vigilant, remained at his side, occasionally licking his face as if to make sure he was alive. "It wasn't an accident," he managed to say between labored breaths. "I was pushed." By Richard Blackwell. The officers exchanged skeptical looks. Richard was a well-known and respected figure in the region, a businessman with political connections and an apparently impeccable reputation. "Mr. Coleman, you're—" "Herrn Schock," said the commander of the vessel, assuming a paternalistic tone. "Accidents happen, especially when the sea is as rough as it is today." "No, you don't understand," insisted Tyler, trying to sit up despite his exhaustion. "He tried to get rid of me because I discovered his schemes to embezzle money from our company." Again, the officers exchanged glances. This time, however, there was a shadow of doubt in their expressions. The commander, an older man with decades of experience, studied Tyler's face for a few moments before speaking. "Do you have any proof of these accusations?" At that moment, Max vigorously shook himself, spreading water in all directions, and the collar on his neck jingled. Tyler looked at the animal, and a weak smile formed on his lips. "Yes," he answered, extending his hand to the Labrador's collar. "I have all the evidence right here." Meanwhile, on the yacht that continued its navigation, Richard received a call that made his blood freeze. "Mr. Blackwell, this is Lieutenant Smith from the Coast Guard. We have Mr. Tyler Coleman aboard our vessel. He's fine, considering the circumstances, and has made some interesting allegations about you." Richard's confident expression crumbled like a sandcastle hit by the tide. Across the deck, Isabella watched, discreetly holding the cell phone where she had just sent a message to Detective Morgan, an old friend of Tyler's. "Emergency. Tyler in danger. Richard Blackwell involved. Need immediate help in Newport Bay." The storm forming on the horizon was just a prelude to what was to come. Newport Harbor Medical Center buzzed with unusual activity for that time of night. Nurses and doctors hurried down the corridor leading to the intensive care unit, where Tyler had been installed for observation. Max, defying all hospital rules, remained beside the bed thanks to the intervention of Detective Morgan, who had arrived minutes after the ambulance. "How are you feeling?" asked Morgan, a middle-aged man with keen eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Like I've been run over by a boat," replied Tyler with a weak smile, his voice still hoarse from the salt water, "but alive thanks to Max." The detective nodded, briefly stroking the Labrador's head, who accepted the gesture without diverting his protective attention from Tyler. "Isabella called me. She's on her way," Morgan informed, pulling up a chair to sit beside the bed. "In the meantime, I need you to tell me exactly what happened." Tyler took a deep breath, feeling a stab of pain in his ribs, and began to recount the events of the night. The confrontation with Richard, the veiled threats, and finally, the moment he was pushed into the sea. "And you're sure it was intentional?" questioned Morgan, taking notes in a small notebook. "Absolutely," confirmed Tyler. "Richard knew exactly what he was doing. What he didn't expect was for Max to jump after me, or for a Coast Guard boat to be so close." The detective frowned, reflecting on the implications of the account. "Richard Blackwell has many powerful friends in the region," he commented, carefully choosing his words. "Proving an attempted drowning will be complicated without witnesses or physical evidence." "But I have evidence," reminded Tyler, pointing to Max's collar now stored in a plastic bag on the bedside table. "The flash drive with all the documents that prove the financial diversions is in the internal compartment. It's waterproof, so it should be intact." Morgan picked up the bag and examined the collar with interest. He found the small hidden compartment and removed the storage device. "I'll analyze this immediately," he assured, putting the flash drive in his pocket. "Meanwhile, we'll have to deal with another complicated situation." "Which one?" asked Tyler, feeling a chill of apprehension. "Richard is already controlling the narrative," explained the detective, showing the screen of his cell phone where several notifications from news sites appeared. "He's giving interviews, claiming that you suffered a tragic accident due to weather conditions. According to him, you've been depressed for months due to financial problems in the company, and he fears it might have been deliberate." "He's suggesting I tried to drown myself on purpose," exclaimed Tyler, incredulous. "It's absurd. The company has never been more profitable." "Exactly why his narrative is dangerous," agreed Morgan. If he claims the company is in crisis, he creates an alibi for when we discover the embezzlement. He can claim you're trying to incriminate him to hide your own administrative errors. Max, sensing his owner's agitation, emitted a low whine and brought his muzzle closer to his hand as if offering comfort. Tyler automatically stroked the Labrador's fur, trying to organize his thoughts. "We need to act quickly," he concluded, trying to sit up in bed but being prevented by a stab of pain. The more time he has to spread lies, the harder it will be to recover the truth. At that moment, the door to the room opened and Isabella rushed in, her face marked by concern and relief at seeing Tyler conscious. "Thank God," she murmured, approaching to hug him carefully. "When I saw the yacht moving away without you, I knew something terrible had happened." "You were still on the yacht?" asked Tyler, surprised. "I thought you had left earlier." "I stayed to observe Richard as we agreed," she explained, sitting on the edge of the bed. "After you fell, it was chaos. Richard started giving contradictory orders to the crew, first to rescue you, then to continue sailing because it was dangerous to stop with the rough sea." "Classic distraction maneuver," commented Morgan, who was listening attentively. "Exactly," continued Isabella. "Meanwhile, he was already on the phone with press advisors and lawyers. In less than half an hour, the story of the tragic accident was already circulating, with insinuations about your mental state." Tyler closed his eyes, feeling a wave of anger and helplessness. Richard was using all his connections and influence to create an alternative version of the facts, a version that not only absolved him but transformed him into a victim. "There's more," said Isabella hesitantly. "I heard Richard talking to someone on the phone. He said something like, 'Make sure he doesn't leave that hospital,' and mentioned that he would send someone to make sure the problem was permanently resolved." A heavy silence fell over the room. Max, as if sensing the growing tension, stood, alert, his eyes fixed on the door. "We need to transfer you immediately," decided Morgan, standing up. "This hospital isn't safe." "To where?" questioned Tyler. "If Richard has as much influence as we suspect, there's no place in Newport where I can hide for long." Isabella and Morgan exchanged glances, and it was she who answered. "I've already thought about that. I have a plan." "My cousin is a doctor at St. Luke's Hospital in Los Angeles," Isabella quickly explained. "It's a private, discreet hospital, and she can arrange your entry through the back, without official records for now." Morgan nodded, thoughtful. "It could work. Richard will search for you in public hospitals first, and probably won't expect such a quick transfer to another city." "And what about the flash drive?" asked Tyler, looking at the pocket where Morgan had stored the device. "I'll analyze it with a trusted team," assured the detective. "Greg from the cybercrime department is discreet and extremely competent. If there's anything that can incriminate Richard, he'll find it." Max suddenly raised his head, ears attentive, and began to growl softly at the door. Seconds later, they heard footsteps approaching down the corridor. "It might just be the nurse," suggested Isabella, but her tone betrayed uncertainty. The three fell silent, watching the doorknob turn slowly. The door opened to reveal a man dressed in a nurse's uniform, carrying a tray with medications. His look, however, was not that of a healthcare professional. There was something calculating, cold, that immediately put Morgan on alert. "I came to apply painkillers," announced the man, advancing toward the bed. Max positioned himself between the fake nurse and Tyler, teeth bared, the fur on his neck bristling. The man hesitated, clearly not counting on the presence of the dog. "We didn't request painkillers," responded Morgan, standing up and discreetly showing his badge. "And you don't work at this hospital, do you?" The fake nurse froze for an instant, quickly evaluating his options. Then he dropped the tray and turned to flee, only to find two hospital security guards whom Isabella had silently called, using the emergency button. "Arrest this man for attempted trespass and identity forgery," ordered Morgan, his voice calm, contrasting with the gravity of the situation, "and check the contents of that syringe immediately." As the imposter was taken away, protesting his innocence, Tyler exchanged a significant look with Isabella and Morgan. "We have to get out of here now," he concluded. "Richard won't take long to send reinforcements when his first plan fails." "The ambulance for transfer is already on its way," informed Isabella, hanging up the cell phone she had used to contact her cousin. "It will arrive in 15 minutes through the service entrance." Morgan took command of the situation with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades dealing with emergencies. "Isabella, help Tyler prepare. I'll ensure the corridors are clear and place some of my men to monitor the entrances. We also need a disguise for Max. A dog of this size attracts attention." "In the emergency bag I brought for Tyler, there's a service vest," remembered Isabella. "We can pass Max off as an official assistance dog." As they prepared for the transfer, Tyler couldn't help but think about how his life had turned upside down in a matter of hours. From a renowned businessman to a fugitive in his own territory, pursued by the man he once considered his best friend. "What will Richard do when he discovers I've escaped?" he asked, as Isabella helped him dress in dry clothes. "He'll probably intensify the smear campaign," she replied, adjusting the pillow to facilitate his movement. "But that might play to our advantage. The more desperate he gets, the more mistakes he'll make. And we have an advantage he doesn't know about yet," added Morgan, returning to the room after checking the corridors. "The commander of the coast guard vessel that rescued you recorded the entire rescue with his body camera. We have visual evidence of you stating, still in the water, that you were pushed by Richard." A glimmer of hope lit up in Tyler's eyes. It was circumstantial evidence, but combined with the documents on the flash drive and the testimony of the fake nurse, it was beginning to form a solid case. "The ambulance has arrived," announced one of Morgan's officers, appearing at the door. "Service entrance clear, no reporters or suspicious persons in the vicinity." With quick and efficient movements, Isabella and the paramedics transferred Tyler to the ambulance stretcher. Max, now wearing the service vest that identified him as an assistance dog, remained attentive to every movement, to every person who approached. "I'll go a few cars ahead to ensure the path is clear," explained Morgan, accompanying them to the service elevator. "We'll maintain contact only through disposable phones from now on. Isabella has the numbers." As the elevator silently descended to the basement, Tyler observed Isabella's tense face, who compulsively checked her cell phone. "What is it?" "Richard just gave a press conference," she replied, showing the screen where a live video displayed his ex-partner, appearing devastated, expressing deep concern about the mental and emotional state of his longtime friend, Tyler Coleman. "He's really trying to pass me off as unstable," murmured Tyler, anger mixing with a reluctant pinch of admiration for his adversary's cunning. "He knows it's the only way to discredit the accusations when they come to light." "But he made a crucial mistake," observed Isabella, a small smile forming on her lips as they watched Richard's statements. "Which one?" "He mentioned financial problems as the reason for your supposed instability, but any investigative journalist can verify that the company has never been more profitable, at least officially. His lie gives us exactly the hook to expose the truth about where the money was really going." The ambulance was waiting in the underground garage, engines running, ready to depart. As the paramedics transferred him to the vehicle, Tyler felt a renewed determination growing inside him. Richard might have resources, connections, and an impeccable appearance of a respectable businessman, but there was something Tyler had that his ex-partner would never understand. People who really cared about him, willing to risk everything. "For the truth, we're ready," announced the ambulance driver. "Next stop, St. Luke's Hospital, Los Angeles." The doors closed, and with a discreet siren, the vehicle began its journey through the rainy night, carrying not just an injured man, but also the hope of justice. The journey along the coastal highway proceeded in tense silence, broken only by the occasional report from the driver, confirming they weren't being followed. The rain now fell intensely, turning the winding road into a challenge even for the most experienced drivers. Max remained vigilant at Tyler's side, reacting to the slightest jolt or unexpected noise. "He hasn't relaxed for a second since it all began," commented Tyler, observing the Labrador with admiration. Isabella, seated on the opposite bench of the ambulance, smiled. "He knows something is wrong. Animals have a perception that we often underestimate," she replied, extending her hand to briefly stroke the dog's golden fur. "Remember when you adopted him after the accident? Everyone said it was crazy to train a puppy as an assistance dog instead of acquiring an already trained one. Tyler nodded, allowing himself a small smile at the memory. It was the best decision I ever made. Max isn't just an assistance dog, he's family. The ambulance radio crackled, interrupting the moment of tranquility, and Detective Morgan's voice filled the compartment. All clear ahead. I've already contacted St. Luke's Hospital, and your entry is being prepared. Dr. Marcia, Isabella's cousin, is waiting at the service entrance. Over. Received, replied the driver. ETA in approximately 20 minutes. Over. Isabella checked, her cell phone again, quickly scrolling through the news. What is Richard doing now? Asked Tyler, trying to find a more comfortable position on the narrow stretcher. He just announced a temporary leave from the company presidency to dedicate himself fully to the search for his missing friend, she informed, the disdain evident in her voice. He's turning this into a media spectacle. Emotional interviews, promises of rewards for those with information. Even a candlelight vigil has been organized in front of the company headquarters in Newport. Manipulative as always, murmured Tyler. And the press is buying his story. Most of them, yes, confirmed Isabella, continuing to read. But there are some more skeptical journalists beginning to ask inconvenient questions. A reporter from the Business Journal questioned why the Coast Guard wasn't immediately informed about the accident, and another asked about rumors of an ongoing financial investigation. A stronger jolt made the ambulance sway, and Max immediately stood up, growling softly at the rear door. Easy, boy, reassured Tyler. It's just the rough road. The Labrador relaxed a bit but kept his eyes fixed on the door, as if expecting it to open at any moment to reveal a threat. He's more tense than usual, observed Isabella, furrowing her brow. Do you think... Before she could complete the thought, the driver abruptly applied the brakes, causing everyone to hold on to avoid being thrown forward. What happened? Shouted Isabella to the cabin. Roadblock, replied the paramedic beside her, peering through the small window that separated the patient compartment from the cabin. Looks like an accident. Or a trap, murmured Tyler, exchanging a significant look with Isabella. The radio crackled again, and Morgan's voice, now visibly concerned, filled the environment. Ambulance, change route immediately. Repeat, change. Route, we have information that Richard has sent men to intercept you. The accident ahead is an ambush. Over. Isabella turned pale while the driver quickly maneuvered to turn around on the narrow road. How did he find out? Asked Tyler, feeling adrenaline flood his system again. He must have informants at the hospital, deduced Isabella, holding onto the seat as the ambulance made a sharp turn. Or someone leaked information about the transfer. The vehicle was now accelerating in the opposite direction, its headlights cutting through the curtain of rain that fell relentlessly. Through the rear window they could see lights from other vehicles turning on and initiating pursuit. They're following us, alerted the paramedic, his voice betraying nervousness. The radio crackled to life once more. Ambulance, follow the next exit on the right. There's a secondary road that leads to Redondo Beach. A federal police vehicle is on its way to escort you from there to Los Angeles. Over. Received, replied the driver, visibly tense. But we have unwanted company following us. For several more minutes, the ambulance continued its escape, zigzagging through increasingly narrow and dark roads. The pursuing vehicles seemed to know the region well, staying dangerously close despite the evasive maneuvers. There, Isabella suddenly pointed, spotting the almost invisible sign indicating the secondary road. To the right. The driver turned, sharply, making the ambulance skid slightly on the wet asphalt before regaining traction and plunging into the almost abandoned road. The trees closed over them like a tunnel, making visibility even more precarious. Did we lose them? Asked Tyler, trying to see through the rear window. In response, headlights appeared again in the distance, persistent in their pursuit. These guys don't give up, muttered the driver, accelerating even more, despite the dangerous conditions. That's when they spotted the flashing blue lights ahead, the federal police vehicle that Morgan had promised. A momentary relief swept through the ambulance, until the radio crackled again. "Ambulance, be careful. We've received information that Richard may have contacts within the federal police. We cannot confirm if the vehicle ahead is really ours." Over. Everyone's blood seemed to freeze at the possibility. They were trapped between pursuers behind and possible imposters ahead. "What do we do now?" asked the driver, his voice a mix of fear and frustration. It was Tyler who responded, with surprising calm in his voice. "Continue advancing, but maintain a safe distance from the vehicle. Isabella, call Morgan on his personal cell. We need confirmation about who's in that vehicle." While Isabella dialed with trembling hands, Max suddenly raised his head, ears alert, his focus completely turned to the vehicle ahead. Then, to everyone's surprise, the Labrador visibly relaxed and wagged his tail. "He recognizes someone," concluded Tyler, observing the unusual reaction of the animal. "Max only acts like this with people he knows and trusts." At that moment, Morgan answered Isabella's phone, and after a brief conversation, she hung up with a sigh of relief. "It's Detective Walker in the vehicle," she informed. "Morgan's personal friend and his son's godfather. We can trust him." The ambulance cautiously approached, and when the driver of the police vehicle lowered the window, it revealed a middle-aged man with a federal police badge who waved in recognition. "Follow me," he instructed through the loudspeaker. "I have reinforcements positioned further ahead to stop your pursuers." As they resumed their journey, now with the official escort, Tyler allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would make it to St. Luke's Hospital safely. What would happen after that, however, remained an enigma as dark as the stormy night that enveloped them. St. Luke's Hospital stood like a white fortress against the still dark sky of early dawn. Unlike the typical chaos of public hospitals, its environment was organized and discreet, with silent corridors and a reduced but extremely efficient staff. Dr. Marcia, Duarte Isabella's cousin, waited at the service entrance with a small trusted team. Tall and with the same determined look as her cousin, she quickly took command of the situation when the ambulance finally parked after the tense journey. "Room 507, private wing," she instructed as they helped transfer Tyler to a hospital gurney. "It's already prepared and isolated. We have reinforced security on the floor and cameras at all accesses." "Thank you, Marcia," said Tyler, recognizing her from the few family events they had shared over the years. "I don't know how I can repay. Save that gratitude for when you're completely recovered," she replied with a brief smile. Then, noticing Max, she added, "The dog will need to wear the service vest at all times. I've already informed the administration that it's essential for your treatment." As the small group discreetly traversed the corridors, Detective Walker, who had escorted them there, walked ahead, eyes attentive to any suspicious movement. Upon reaching the 5th floor, they found Morgan already waiting for them, his tired face reflecting the tense hours since the incident on the yacht. The pursuers were intercepted and detained, he informed as soon as the door to the room closed behind them. There were 4 men, all with fake documents. None have talked yet, but the fingerprints of 2 of them have already been identified in the system. Former private security guards with a history of working for businessmen of dubious reputation. "Were you able to trace them back to Richard?" asked Tyler, as the paramedics carefully transferred him to the hospital bed. "Not directly yet," admitted Morgan, "but it's a matter of time. Men like these always end up making deals when they realize they're facing serious charges." Dr. Marcia quickly initiated a complete examination of Tyler, checking his vital signs and the bruises that were beginning to form where his body had hit the water with force. "You were lucky," she concluded after a few minutes. "There are no signs of serious internal damage, but I want to do more detailed exams in the morning to be sure. For now, I recommend absolute rest." "I'll rest when Richard is behind bars," retorted Tyler, trying to sit up, only to be gently pushed back by the firm shoulders of the doctor. "You won't help anyone if your condition worsens," warned Marcia with authority. "You need to regain your strength for the battle ahead." Isabella, who had remained silent, observing the movement in the room, suddenly raised her hand to request silence, her eyes fixed on the screen of her cell phone. "You need to see this," she announced, increasing the volume of the device. It was a live broadcast of a press conference. Richard Blackwell, impeccably dressed despite the late hour, spoke with a grave expression to a room full of journalists. At his side, a man in a suit whom Tyler recognized as Kevin Reynolds, the ambitious legal director of the company. Shakis with deep regret that I announced that, given the tragic circumstances involving my partner and longtime friend, Tyler Coleman, I have made the difficult decision to fully assume control of Blackwell and Coleman Navigation, declared Richard, his voice laden with false emotion. This measure, provided for in the company's bylaws for emergency situations, aims to ensure operational stability and protect the jobs of our more than 800 employees. Son of a bitch, muttered Tyler, feeling a wave of anger course through his body. He's using my supposed disappearance to take full control. Furthermore, continued Richard in the broadcast, our legal department has identified in recent weeks concerning financial irregularities that may be related to the unstable emotional state that Mr. Coleman had been exhibiting. Out of a respect for his privacy and our friendship, I chose not to make these discoveries public earlier. He's inverting everything, exclaimed Isabella, indignant. He's accusing you of exactly what he did. Kevin Reynolds took the microphone, his serious expression perfectly complementing the performance. As legal director, I must inform that we have already initiated a complete internal audit, and depending on the results, we will be obliged to take the case to the competent authorities. However, at this moment, our main concern is the safety and well-being of Mr. Coleman. The camera returned to Richard, who now displayed a studied expression of concern. We are offering a substantial reward for any information that leads to the whereabouts of Tyler. We fear for his safety and his mental state. If anyone sees him, please do not approach him directly. He may be confused and frightened. Contact the authorities or our emergency center. Morgan turned off Isabella's cell phone, interrupting the broadcast. The room plunged into a heavy silence, broken only by the discreet sound of medical equipment. He's good, the detective finally admitted. He's building a perfect narrative. The unstable partner who disappeared after being discovered embezzling company funds. If you appear publicly, you'll be seen as a fugitive. If you stay hidden, you confirm his story. He's not just defaming me, observed Tyler, his countenance somber. He's actively hunting me. That reward is practically an invitation for any opportunist to turn me in. Max, sensing his owner's growing agitation, moved closer to the bed, resting his muzzle on the edge of the mattress in a protective gesture. Tyler automatically extended his hand to stroke his head, finding comfort in the simple and unwavering loyalty of the animal. We need to counterattack, affirmed Isabella, her gaze reflecting the same determination that Tyler felt growing inside him. We can't let him control the narrative like this. I agree, said Morgan, but we need to be strategic. The flash drive you gave us is being analyzed by the technical team at this very moment. If the evidence is as compelling as you claim, we'll have a basis for an official operation. And how long will that take? Questioned Tyler, the frustration evident in his voice. With each passing minute, Richard consolidates his control over the company and destroys my reputation. A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Everyone froze for an instant, until Dr. Marsh's voice sounded from the other side. It's me with the on-duty nurse. Walker cautiously opened the door, checking the corridors before allowing the two women to enter. The nurse, a middle-aged lady with a gentle expression, brought a tray with medications and monitoring equipment. This is Nina, Marsha introduced. She's worked with me for 15 years and is completely trustworthy. She will personally care for Tyler tonight. While Nina prepared the medications, Marsha approached the group with a concerned expression. You need to know something, she said in a low voice. I just received a call from administration. Someone who identified themselves as Richard Blackwell's press advisor contacted the hospital, asking if Tyler had been admitted here. What did you say? Asked Morgan, tense. I denied it, obviously. I said I had no records of any patient by that name, but this means they've already started searching hospitals in the city. Isabella exchanged a significant look with Tyler. The net was closing faster than they had anticipated. We need a new plan, she concluded, turning to Morgan. "We can't wait for official bureaucracy. We need to act now." The detective frowned. "Thoughtful. I have an idea," he said finally, "but it's risky and not completely legal." "At this point," replied Tyler, his expression resolute, "I'm willing to consider anything." The hospital room transformed into an improvised operations center. Morgan asked that all cell phones be turned off and placed in a metal box he carried with him. "Precaution against tracking," he explained. Then he pulled out an antiquated device from his pocket, a model that seemed at least a decade old. "Clean phone," he said, showing the device. "No GPS, no internet connection, practically impossible to track." "Looks like someone has watched too many spy movies," commented Isabella, trying to alleviate the tension with humor. But her smile quickly disappeared at the detective's serious, "Look, 15 years chasing white-collar criminals taught me that paranoia is just good sense when facing powerful people," he replied, dialing a number from memory. "And Richard Blackwell is exactly the type of adversary that justifies all precautions." While Morgan conversed in a low voice on the phone, Tyler observed the movement in the room, the adrenaline from recent events beginning to give way to physical exhaustion. Max, perceiving his fatigue, settled closer, his warm body a silent comfort. "You need to rest," insisted Dr. Marcia, checking the IV connected to Tyler's arm. "Your body has undergone considerable trauma, even if there's no permanent damage." "I can't relax knowing that Richard is out there, destroying everything I've built," replied Tyler, rubbing his eyes. "The company, my reputation." "And both will be restored," assured Isabella, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But Marcia is right. You won't be useful to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Morgan ended the call and turned to the group, an expression of renewed determination on his face. "My contact at the federal police has agreed to help," he announced. "Robert Neves, an old friend from the academy. He works in the financial crimes division and has the autonomy to initiate a preliminary investigation without much bureaucracy." "What exactly can he do?" asked Tyler, feeling a spark of hope. "He'll personally analyze the evidence on the flash drive yet tonight. If we confirm there's basis for an official investigation, he can issue emergency warrants to search and seize the company's financial records." "And what about Richard?" questioned Isabella. "He's certainly already destroying evidence at this very moment." "That's where the not exactly legal part of my plan comes in," admitted Morgan, lowering his voice even more. "Robert has the authority to freeze corporate accounts and block access to company systems while the investigation is ongoing. Normally this would require a formal court order, but let's say he has means to accelerate the process in exceptional cases." "Couldn't that compromise the legality of the future investigation?" worried Tyler, who, despite the desperate situation, still cared about the legitimacy of the process. "Robert knows what he's doing," assured Morgan. "He'll ensure everything is retroactively formalized. The important thing now is to prevent Richard from causing more damage while we're tied up by bureaucracy." While they discussed the details of the plan, Nina, the nurse, silently administered the medications prescribed by Marcia. Tyler felt the painkiller beginning to take effect, the pain in his body gradually diminishing to a distant tingling. "There's still another problem," Isabella reminded. "The public narrative. Richard is painting you as unstable and possibly criminal. Each hour that passes with this story circulating without contest makes it more difficult to reverse public perception." "I have a trusted journalist," offered Walker, who until then had remained silent, watching the door. "Amanda Prado from the National Courier. She has a history of investigations against corporate corruption and isn't easily intimidated." "Can we trust her?" asked Tyler, skeptical. "The last thing we need is more negative exposure. Amanda was instrumental in dismantling the ocean construction corruption scheme last year," explained Walker. "She protects her sources tooth and nail and only publishes when she has concrete evidence." Tyler exchanged glances with Isabella, who nodded discreetly. "Contact her," he finally decided, "but no interviews yet. Just put her on standby for when we have something substantial." Morgan's phone vibrated, and he quickly answered. "Greg finished the preliminary analysis of the flash drive," he announced after a brief conversation. "And the news is good. We have records of transfers to offshore accounts incriminating Emails, adulterated contracts, all meticulously organized with timestamps and intact metadata. It's a solid case. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. The evidence that Tyler had patiently collected over months would be sufficient to initiate an official investigation. "Robert will be here in an hour," continued Morgan. "He'll bring the preliminary warrants, and we can put the plan into action even before dawn." "And me?" questioned Tyler. "What's my role in all this?" Morgan and Marcia exchanged concerned looks. "Your role now is to rest and recover," replied the detective firmly. "The fewer people who know your whereabouts, the safer you'll be." "I can't simply lie here while you confront Richard," protested Tyler, trying to sit up again, only to be prevented by the dizziness caused by the medications. "It's not a matter of choice," intervened Marcia with medical authority. "Your body needs time to recover from the trauma, and these medications will make you drowsy in the next few minutes. Besides, you are the central piece of this story. If something happens to you, the entire case crumbles." Reluctantly, Tyler acknowledged the logic of the argument. Max, as if perceiving his surrender, rested his muzzle on his arm in a comforting gesture. "Promise you'll keep me informed," he demanded, feeling his eyelids grow heavy. "Scout's honor," guaranteed Morgan with a half-smile. "Now rest. The tide is finally turning in our favor." As Tyler succumbed to drug-induced sleep, the last words he heard were from Isabella, her voice determined. "Richard doesn't know what awaits him." And for the first time since falling into the dark waters of Newport Bay, Tyler allowed himself to believe that he might in fact emerge victorious from this battle. When Tyler awoke, the golden light of the rising sun filtered through the slats of the blinds. For a disorienting moment, he didn't recognize where he was, until the pain in his ribs and the rhythmic beep of the medical equipment brought the memories of the previous night back like a wave. Max, who had been sleeping at the foot of the bed, immediately raised his head upon sensing his awakening. "Good morning, boy," murmured Tyler, extending his hand to pet the Labrador, who approached to lick his fingers in response. The door to the room opened silently, and Isabella entered, carrying a tray with coffee and a folder of documents. Her deep circles under her eyes betrayed a sleepless night, but there was a gleam of victory in her eyes that Tyler hadn't seen in weeks. "How are you feeling?" she asked, placing the tray on the side table. "Like I swam miles in choppy waters," replied Tyler with a slight smile, "which, come to think of it, isn't far from the truth. What time is it?" "Almost 9 in the morning. You slept for about 5 hours. 5 hours, exclaimed Tyler, trying to sit up quickly, only to be prevented by the pain that the sudden movement caused. What happened during that time? Where are Morgan and the others? Isabella helped him adjust the position of the bed to a more upright posture and offered him the cup of coffee before responding. "A lot has happened," she said, opening the folder she had brought. "Robert Neves, Morgan's contact at the federal police, arrived around 4 in the morning. After reviewing the evidence on the flash drive, he not only agreed with the plan, but decided to expand its scope." She extended a series of photographs and documents. Tyler recognized the facade of the Blackwell and Coleman Navigation Headquarters in Newport Beach, now with federal police vehicles parked in front. Another image showed Kevin Reynolds, the legal director, being escorted out of the building, his jacket over his head to hide his face from the cameras. "They initiated a complete operation at dawn," continued Isabella, the pride evident in her voice. "Codename High Tide. Search and seizure warrants for the company headquarters, regional offices and residences of the main executives, including Richard's mansion." "And Richard?" asked Tyler, quickly leafing through the documents, a mixture of hope and apprehension growing in his chest. Isabella's smile diminished slightly. "They haven't located him yet. He wasn't in his mansion when the police arrived, and his private yacht isn't anchored in its usual spot, but..." Her smile returned. "All maritime exits are being monitored, and the federal police issued a travel restriction alert. He won't go far." Tyler nodded, processing the information. Part of him already expected that Richard would try to flee at the first sign of trouble. The man had always been a born survivor, with a keen instinct for danger. And what about the company and the public narrative? Isabella picked up a tablet she had left on the table and showed the screen to Tyler. It was the National Courier website with a headline that occupied the entire front page. Operation High Tide. FBI investigates corruption scheme in the largest maritime tourism company in America. Amanda Prado, the journalist recommended by Walker, received controlled information about the operation as soon as the first warrants were executed, explained Isabella. She published a detailed article less than an hour ago, highlighting that you are a victim, not a suspect. Tyler quickly scanned the article, noting how the journalist had presented the facts in a clear and impartial manner, but with emphasis on the evidence that pointed to his innocence and Richard's culpability. "This is impressive," he admitted, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. "How did she manage to gather so many details in such a short time?" "Morgan arranged an exclusive interview with one of the Coast Guard officers who rescued you," revealed Isabella. "The man confirmed that you were clearly in shock and repeatedly said you had been pushed. He also mentioned Max jumping into the water to save you. That detail captured the public's imagination." As if understanding they were talking about him, Max wagged his tail and emitted a low bark, making both of them smile briefly. "There's more," continued Isabella, showing another page on the tablet. "Social media is buzzing with the hashtag Justice for Tyler. Several company employees have begun to speak out, reporting suspicious behaviors from Richard in recent weeks. Including the head of security," added a familiar voice from the door. It was Morgan, looking even more tired than Isabella, but with the same expression of contained satisfaction. "He just gave testimony, confirming that Richard instructed him to keep the yacht's crew away from the lower deck during his conversation with you." The detective entered the room, followed by a tall, athletic man whom Tyler deduced to be Robert Neves from the federal police. Max, after briefly sniffing the newcomer, apparently approved of him, returning to lie at the foot of the bed. "Mr. Coleman," greeted Robert with a nod. "It's good to finally meet you, although the circumstances aren't ideal." "The pleasure is mine," replied Tyler, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "And I can't thank you enough for what you're doing." "Just doing my job," replied the agent modestly, but a slight smile indicated he appreciated the recognition. "And I must say that the evidence you gathered is exceptionally well documented. We rarely see a case so meticulously constructed by a victim." "Months of suspicions and silent investigation," explained Tyler. "I began to notice discrepancies in the financial reports almost a year ago, but only recently managed to connect all the dots." "Well, your work is bearing fruit," assured Robert. "We've just obtained complete access to the company's servers and are cross-referencing data with the information you provided. The preliminary results already confirm everything you alleged and indicate that the scheme may be even bigger than we suspected." A contemplative silence fell over the room as Tyler digested this information. The validation of his suspicions brought a contradictory mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction for being right, sadness for the magnitude of the betrayal. From someone he once considered a friend. "And what happens now?" he finally asked. "Now comes the hardest part," replied Morgan. "We need to find Richard before he manages to leave the country or destroy additional evidence." "And what about me?" questioned Tyler. "Should I continue hiding here?" Morgan and Robert exchanged glances, apparently having already discussed this matter. "We believe it would be strategically advantageous for you to make a controlled public appearance," suggested Robert, "not only to refute Richard's allegations about your mental state, but also to increase the pressure on him." "A press conference?" asked Tyler, furrowing his brow. "Not exactly," replied Morgan. "Amanda Prado is willing to do an exclusive interview right here at the hospital, controlled on your terms with pre-approved questions." Tyler reflected on the proposal. The idea of exposing himself publicly, especially in his current state, wasn't appealing. On the other hand, the opportunity to reclaim the narrative and pressure Richard was tempting. "I think we should do it," opined Isabella. "The longer you remain in the shadows, the more space Richard has to distort the truth, even with all the advances of the investigation." Before Tyler could respond, his gaze was drawn to the screen of the tablet still in his hands. A breaking news notification was flashing. Mega yacht intercepted by Navy in international waters. Richard Blackwell believed to be on board. Intercepted doesn't mean captured, warned Robert, after reading the news that had caught everyone's attention. His phone began to ring immediately, and he stepped away to answer, speaking in a low voice and with an increasingly tense expression. "How did he manage to leave the country so quickly?" asked Tyler, incredulous. "I thought all exits were being monitored." "The Poseidon," murmured Isabella, suddenly understanding. "The new ultra-luxury yacht that the company acquired 3 months ago." "Exactly," confirmed Morgan. "Equipped with the most advanced navigation systems and capable of speeds well above average for vessels of that size. If he managed to reach the Poseidon before the operation began." Robert returned to the group, hanging up the phone with a grave expression. "The yacht was spotted by a Navy vessel near the limit of territorial waters," he informed. "When they realized who might be on board, they initiated pursuit, but the Poseidon is surprisingly fast. They only managed visual confirmation before it entered international waters." "And now?" questioned Isabella. "Is he simply going to escape?" "Not necessarily," replied Robert. "We're activating international cooperation. The yacht is currently on a route that suggests it's heading for Mexico or South America. We've already contacted the authorities of both countries. But if Richard reaches some friendly port," began Tyler, leaving the sentence hanging. "He has connections in both countries," completed Isabella, biting her lip in concern. "Especially in Mexico, where we established a subsidiary last year." A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone processed the implications. Richard fleeing to another country would enormously complicate the justice process, potentially dragging the case out for years in extradition disputes. "There's another option," said Tyler suddenly, his eyes lighting up with an idea. "The Poseidon's tracking system." "Explain," asked Robert, approaching with renewed interest. "When we acquired the yacht, I insisted on a redundant monitoring system, not just the standard GPS, but an independent secondary system connected directly to our operations center," explained Tyler, trying to sit up straighter in the bed. "It was a precaution after an incident with another of our boats that was left adrift due to a failure in the main system." "And Richard knows about this system?" asked Morgan. "Yes, but—" A slow smile formed on Tyler's lips. "What he probably doesn't know is that I have personal access to this system. I can track it directly from my tablet, with real-time updates." "And could you remotely disable it?" questioned Robert, already understanding the implication. "Better than that," replied Tyler, his smile widening. "I can partially take control of the systems. Nothing that directly affects navigation. That would be dangerous. But I can drastically reduce the maximum speed, forcing it to operate in economy mode." Isabella immediately picked up her tablet and handed it to Tyler, who quickly accessed an application protected by several layers of security. After a few moments of concentration, the screen displayed a maritime map with a luminous point moving slowly. "There it is," he pointed. "Approximately 50 nautical miles from the coast, on a southwest route. At the current speed, I estimate it would reach Mexican waters in less than 10 hours. Can you reduce it?" asked Robert, leaning over the tablet. Tyler nodded and began working on the application, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who intimately knew the system. The others watched in silence, the tension palpable in the air. "Done," he finally announced. "I just remotely activated the emergency protocol for potential failure in the propulsion system. The yacht will automatically reduce speed to 1/3 of maximum capacity, citing safety reasons." "Richard can't simply deactivate this?" questioned Morgan. "Not without specific authorization codes that only 2 technicians in all of America possess, and both are on vacation in remote locations at this moment, by coincidence," replied Tyler, with a slight ironic smile. "It was a system I implemented after noticing the first irregularities, a kind of insurance." Robert immediately took his phone and began making calls, informing the maritime authorities of the new situation. Meanwhile, everyone observed the point on the map, which was already visibly beginning to reduce its speed. "Brilliant," commented Isabella, lightly squeezing Tyler's shoulder in a gesture of support. Now the Navy will have time to catch up with him before he reaches foreign waters. There's still a problem, warned Morgan, always pragmatic. Even if they intercept the yacht, we're talking about international waters. They can't simply board it without specific authorization. Leave that to me, intervened Robert, covering the phone's microphone for a moment. We have enough evidence to request a joint interception operation, especially with the collaboration of the Mexican authorities, who seem very interested in preventing Richard from reaching their territory carrying diplomatic problems. While Robert continued his articulations by phone, Tyler turned his attention to the tablet, now displaying a more detailed view of the yacht. Through the system, he could see not only the location but also data about the Poseidon's internal systems. He's trying to restart the propulsion system, he observed, tracking the commands being entered. Without success, obviously, and this is interesting. What? Asked Isabella and Morgan almost simultaneously. There are at least 6 people on board besides Richard, replied Tyler, analyzing the data on energy and water consumption. Probably part of the regular crew, but also, he seems to have company in the main suite. Company? Repeated Isabella, raising an eyebrow. The water consumption and pattern of system usage indicate presence in the master suite, which is rarely used by the crew, explained Tyler. And considering Richard's history, he wouldn't flee alone, concluded Morgan, especially if he intends to start a new life in another country. Robert ended his call and turned to the group, a smile of satisfaction on his face. It's done, he announced. The U.S. Navy, with support from the Mexican Coast Guard, is coordinating an interception operation. 2 vessels have already been redirected and should reach the Poseidon in approximately 3 hours. And what about the authorization for boarding? Questioned Morgan. A federal judge has just issued a special warrant based on the evidence. We already have, and the clear attempt to flee, replied Robert. It's being transmitted electronically at this moment. A climate of cautious celebration settled in the room. For the first time since the incident on the original yacht, it seemed that Richard would finally meet justice. However, Tyler kept his eyes fixed on the luminous point that represented the Poseidon, knowing that with Richard, nothing was as simple as it seemed. He still has 3 hours, he murmured, more to himself than to others. And I know Richard well enough to know he always has a plan B. The next 3 hours were the longest in Tyler's life. While they awaited news of the interception operation, each found their own way to deal with the tension. Robert remained on the phone, coordinating with naval authorities. Morgan walked around the room in measured steps, occasionally stopping to check the map on the tablet. Isabella alternated between checking the latest news and organizing notes for the possible interview with Amanda Prado. Tyler, meanwhile, couldn't take his eyes off the Poseidon's monitoring system, analyzing every small change in the data, every fluctuation in the energy patterns, every change in course, however minor. He's plotting something, he finally commented, after almost 2 hours of silent observation. What do you mean? Asked Isabella, approaching to look at the screen. In the last 30 minutes, there's been a strange pattern of energy consumption, explained Tyler, pointing to graphs that to the others seemed just lines without special meaning. Spikes followed by sharp drops, concentrated mainly in the communications area. Could be just system instability after you force the speed reduction, suggested Robert, who had temporarily ended his calls. No, insisted Tyler, furrowing his brow. I know this pattern. He's deliberately overloading the systems to try to provoke a complete restart. It's a technique we've used before when one of the security systems froze during a cruise. And would this work to disable your remote control? Questioned Morgan, his expression becoming worried again. Possibly, admitted Tyler. The emergency protocol I activated prioritizes safety over performance. If the systems detect a generalized instability, they may initiate a reset sequence that would temporarily disable my restrictions. How long would it take? Asked Robert, already picking up his phone, ready to alert the interception teams. Hard to say precisely, replied Tyler, analyzing the data. The system has safeguards against this kind of manipulation, but if Richard found some competent technician on board, maybe an hour, less. The Navy vessels are still 90 minutes away, informed Robert after quickly checking. We need to delay him even more. Tyler refocused on the system, his fingers dancing over the screen as he accessed deeper layers of the yacht's control software. "I can try something more drastic," he suggested, hesitant. "But it's risky." "What kind of risk?" questioned Morgan, always attentive to legal implications. "I can initiate an even more severe emergency protocol, which would essentially put the Poseidon in controlled drift mode. No active propulsion, just basic navigation systems to avoid collisions." "Wouldn't that be dangerous for everyone on board?" asked Isabella, concerned. "The yacht has redundant systems for emergencies," explained Tyler. "It wouldn't put anyone in real danger, but would effectively paralyze the vessel until the Navy's arrival. The problem is that it would be a much more active interference than simply reducing speed." Robert and Morgan exchanged glances, clearly evaluating the legal implications of the proposed action. "Technically," began Robert slowly, "as partial owner of the vessel, you have the right to activate emergency protocols if you believe the yacht is being used for illegal activities. And we have ample evidence of that," completed Morgan. "The escape itself already constitutes obstruction of justice, not to mention the embezzlement evidence we've already collected." Tyler nodded, turning his attention back to the tablet. After a few moments of internal deliberation, he began entering a complex sequence of commands, his face reflecting the intense concentration. "Done," he finally announced. "I just sent the command to activate the Neptune protocol, a complete emergency stop due to an alleged failure in the propulsion system." Everyone observed the screen awaiting the result. For long seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then, suddenly, the point representing the Poseidon drastically reduced its speed, almost stopping. "It worked!" exclaimed Isabella, unable to contain her enthusiasm. However, the celebration was short-lived. Almost immediately, a red alert appeared on the screen, along with a cryptic message. "Manual override initiated, administrative authentication," read Tyler, his expression quickly changing to concern. He's trying to assume manual control, ignoring the security protocols. "Is that possible?" asked Robert, already returning to the phone to update the interception teams. "Yes, but it requires maximum-level security credentials," replied Tyler, typing furiously, trying to block the attempt. "Credentials that theoretically only I and," his voice momentarily faltered, "and Richard possess." "So he can simply ignore everything you do?" questioned Morgan, the frustration evident in his voice. "Not easily," replied Tyler, still working on the system. "The manual override requires physical confirmations at different points on the yacht, a security measure we implemented to prevent remote hacking. He'll need time to complete the process." "How much time?" asked Robert, phone pressed against his shoulder. 20 minutes, maybe 30 if he encounters difficulties with some terminal," estimated Tyler. "Depends on how much of the crew is helping." "The Navy has managed to reduce the interception time to 60 minutes, informed Robert, after a brief conversation. "But it still may not be enough if he regains full control." Tyler continued working on the system, trying to create additional obstacles for Richard, while the others watched helpless in the face of the technological duel unfolding. "Wait," he suddenly said, interrupting his frenzied work. "There's something I can do. It's drastic, but effective." "What?" asked everyone almost in unison. "I can activate the aerial protocol," replied Tyler, using internal company terminology that the others didn't recognize. "And that would do what exactly?" insisted Morgan. "It would cause a complete and irreversible failure in all non-essential electronic systems of the yacht, including propulsion, external communication, and advanced navigation," explained Tyler. "It would maintain only the basic safety systems and emergency beacons." "Wouldn't that be sabotage?" questioned Robert, his forehead furrowed. "Potentially dangerous for everyone on board?" "Technically, it's a last resort protocol to prevent theft of the vessel," clarified Tyler. "And no, it wouldn't put anyone in real danger. The Poseidon would simply drift, but with all basic safety systems intact. Lifeboats, flares, emergency communication. It would be like transforming a luxury yacht into a drifting but safe boat," summarized Isabella, understanding the idea. Tyler nodded, looking at Robert and Morgan, implicitly asking for authorization. Legally, it's a grey area, admitted Robert after a moment of reflection. But considering the circumstances and the fact that Richard is actively trying to flee justice, losing corporate property, do it, decided Morgan, taking responsibility. If there are legal consequences later, we'll deal with them. With a solemn nod, Tyler turned his attention to the tablet. Unlike the previous sequences, this time he accessed a completely separate menu protected by multiple layers of authentication, including facial recognition. Aerial system activated, he finally announced. Complete shutdown in 3, 2, 1. On the screen, all data from the Poseidon suddenly disappeared, replaced by a simple flashing icon that indicated only the location, now completely stationary. Done, said Tyler, reclining against the pillows, exhausted by the effort. The Poseidon is effectively neutralized. Richard isn't going anywhere until the Navy arrives. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, interrupted only by the insistent ringing of Robert's phone. Hello? Yes, I understand. Keep me informed. Robert hung up the phone, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. The Navy has just received the emergency signal from the Poseidon. They're accelerating the approach, but, encouraged Morgan, noticing the hesitation. They detected the launching of a smaller vessel from the yacht. Probably the emergency boat, completed Robert. It left approximately 10 minutes ago, right after the activation of your protocol. Tyler felt his stomach sink. He had an alternative escape plan, of course he did. A boat won't go very far in the open sea, observed Isabella, trying to maintain optimism, especially if the Navy already knows of its existence. Depends on the type of boat, retorted Tyler, thoughtful. The Poseidon was equipped with a high-performance escape boat, practically a fast launch disguised as an emergency vessel. It was a specific requirement from Richard during the acquisition, and at the time I saw no reason to question it. Speed? Asked Robert, already dialing another number on his phone. 40 knots, maybe more depending on sea conditions, estimated Tyler. Range of approximately 100 nautical miles with a full tank. Sufficient to reach the Mexican coast considering the current position, concluded Morgan, studying the maritime map. Or some intermediary vessel that's waiting for him, added Tyler, knowing well how Richard's mind worked. He would never bet everything on a single escape strategy. Robert quickly finished his call and turned to the group. The Navy is redirecting a helicopter for aerial search. They're maintaining the original course for the Poseidon, but have assigned a smaller and faster vessel to try to intercept the boat. Will it be enough? Asked Isabella, her voice betraying concern. Depends on how much of a head start Richard had, replied Robert honestly. And if he has some other resource we still don't know about. A tense silence fell over the room, broken only by the occasional beep of the medical equipment. Max, who had remained quiet during the agitation, suddenly raised his head, sniffing, the air as if perceiving something the humans couldn't detect. He always has something more, murmured Tyler, absently stroking the Labrador's fur. That's Richard's modus operandi, layers upon layers of contingencies. Morgan, who was observing Tyler attentively, approached the bed. You know him better than anyone here. If you were in his place, where would you go now? Tyler closed his eyes, trying to put himself in the mind of his ex-partner and friend. Memories of years of partnership, business trips, shared confidences, all now tainted by betrayal, but still valuable for predicting his next steps. He wouldn't. Try to reach Mexico directly, he concluded, finally opening his eyes. That would be the obvious move, and Richard hates being predictable. My guess, he has an intermediary boat waiting. Perhaps a fishing or cargo vessel with a foreign flag, something discreet that could take him to an alternative point on the coast, possibly not even in Mexico. Central America, suggested Robert, already, typing on his own device. Possibly, or maybe not even in North America, replied Tyler, his mind racing through the possibilities. With his resources and contacts, he could be planning successive transfers until reaching some destination where he feels safe. Perhaps the Caribbean islands, where we have business connections. Robert immediately began transmitting these suspicions to the maritime authorities, while Morgan paced thoughtfully around the room. If we're right about an intermediary vessel, the detective thought aloud, we would need some way to identify it among dozens of legitimate boats navigating in the region. That's when Tyler had an epiphany. His eyes widened, and he tried to sit up straighter in the bed, ignoring the pain the sudden movement caused. "The meteorological buoys," he exclaimed, causing everyone to turn toward him. Last year, the company signed a contract with the Oceanographic Institute to install and maintain a network of advanced buoys for collecting climate and maritime data in the North Pacific. "And how does that help us?" asked Isabella, confused. "These buoys not only collect data but also have cameras for visual monitoring of sea conditions," explained Tyler, the enthusiasm growing in his voice. "And this is the important part. I have administrative access to the entire network. It was part of the agreement, since we would be responsible for periodic maintenance." "You can access the feed from these cameras remotely?" questioned Robert, immediately understanding the implication. "Exactly," confirmed Tyler, already opening a new application on his tablet. "And several of these buoys are strategically positioned along the route connecting the US to Mexico and South America." In a few minutes, Tyler had accessed the buoy system and began methodically checking the images transmitted by each one. Most showed only waves and occasionally some distant commercial vessel, but when he reached the buoy designated as NP-42, located precisely in the area where Richard's boat could be navigating, something caught his attention. "There," he pointed, enlarging the image. "That vessel is not an ordinary fishing boat." At a certain distance from the buoy, partially obscured by the sea mist, a boat could be seen that at first glance appeared to be a simple fishing vessel. However, its design and the way it cut through the waves revealed it was something much more sophisticated, disguised to look ordinary. "Looks like a stealth yacht," observed Robert, approaching to examine it better. Luxury vessels modified to look like workboats, very popular among celebrities seeking privacy or criminals trying not to attract attention, completed Morgan. "And look at this," added Tyler, adjusting the image to focus on a small vessel rapidly approaching the larger boat. "I bet that's Richard's boat." Robert immediately photographed the screen with his cell phone and sent the images to the interception teams, along with the exact coordinates provided by the buoy. Then he made a quick call, transmitting the new information in technical terms that the others only partially understood. "Good news," he announced as he hung up. "The Navy helicopter has been redirected to these coordinates and should arrive in approximately 15 minutes. The fast vessel is also adjusting course and will be able to intercept in 30 minutes if the target doesn't drastically change direction." "Will they arrive in time?" asked Isabella, her eyes fixed on the small vessel that, even as they watched, was reaching the larger boat. "It's going to be close," admitted Robert, his face tense as he continued exchanging messages with the teams in the field. For the next 15 minutes, everyone remained in almost absolute silence, observing through the buoy's camera as the drama unfolded at sea. They saw when the small boat finally reached the disguised yacht. They vaguely distinguished figures transferring from one vessel to another. They observed the boat apparently being abandoned, while the larger vessel began to increase speed. And then, just as the yacht was beginning to move away, a new element entered the camera frame: the unmistakable profile of a military helicopter rapidly descending toward the fleeing vessel. "They made it," whispered Tyler, hardly believing it. Max, as if sensing the change in the room's atmosphere, barked once, a sound that for the first time in days seemed laden more with joy than alert. The events of the following hours unfolded like scenes from a movie that Tyler watched with a strange mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The meteorological buoy had provided a limited view of the interception, but the reports that arrived through Robert filled in the details with cinematic vividness. The Navy helicopter had managed to intercept the disguised yacht before it could gain significant distance. After ignored orders to stop, the aircraft crew executed blocking maneuvers until the arrival of the support vessels. Cornered and without viable escape options, the yacht's captain finally complied with the orders to shut down the engines. "They just confirmed," announced Robert, hanging up his phone after what seemed to be the 100th call of the day. Richard Blackwell is in custody, along with 4 other people, 2 crew members of the yacht, his personal assistant Lucas Mitchell, and, he made a brief pause, Cristina Vega. The financial director of the Mexican subsidiary identified Isabella, surprised, so he wasn't fleeing alone. Apparently, they had been maintaining a discreet relationship for over a year, explained Robert. And according to documents found with them, Cristina had prepared a whole new identity for Richard in Mexico, including bank accounts, properties, and even a minority stake in a local navigation company. Long-term planning, murmured Tyler, shaking his head. Typical of him, always prepared for contingencies. But not for this one, observed Morgan with a slight smile of satisfaction. He didn't count on your knowledge of the company's systems and access to the buoys. Tyler nodded silently. There was a bitter irony in the fact that the same technological tools that Richard had ignored for years, considering them Tyler's unnecessary obsessions, had been instrumental in his capture. And what about the Poseidon, he asked, changing the subject to avoid the whirlwind of contradictory emotions he felt. It's been towed and is being escorted back to U.S. waters, replied Robert. The crew is fully cooperating. Apparently, most had no knowledge of Richard's escape plans until the last moment. Typical of him too, commented Isabella. Compartmentalizing information, keeping people in the dark. The operation is still ongoing at the company headquarters, continued Robert, consulting the updates on his cell phone. But we've already discovered enough evidence to confirm everything you alleged, Tyler, and perhaps more. There are indications that the scheme was more extensive than we initially suspected, possibly involving other companies in the sector. When will I be able to return and help rebuild? Asked Tyler, feeling simultaneously exhausted and anxious to act. After months of secretly investigating and days of fleeing, the idea of finally being able to work openly to restore his company was both a relief and a daunting challenge. Dr. Marcia, who had entered the room silently during the conversation, answered before the others could. Not as soon as you'd like, certainly, she affirmed with medical authority. Your exams show that although there's no permanent damage, your body has undergone considerable physical stress. You need at least a week of proper recovery. Before Tyler could protest, the door to the room opened again, revealing Amanda Prado, the journalist from the National Courier, whom Walker had contacted earlier. Tall, with curly hair framed in a shortcut and attentive eyes behind red-framed glasses, she emanated a contained energy of someone accustomed to dealing with explosive stories. "Excuse the interruption," she said, after a nod of recognition from Walker. "But I thought you might want to see this immediately." She extended a tablet open to the main page of the National Courier, where a headline occupied the entire top of the site. Exclusive: Fugitive businessman Richard Blackwell captured in special Navy operation. Just below, a photo of the yacht being boarded, apparently captured from the helicopter. "The full article comes out in 20 minutes, explained Amanda. "It highlights the escape attempt, the capture, the evidence found so far, and, most importantly, completely restores your reputation, Mr. Coleman. We specifically mentioned that you were the victim of an attempted murder and an elaborate smear campaign." Tyler felt a wave of relief course through his body. After days of being portrayed as mentally unstable and potentially criminal, finally, the truth would come to light. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice more choked than he would have liked. Amanda nodded in acknowledgement before continuing. "The repercussion is already massive. We've received dozens of calls from investors and business partners of Blackwell and Coleman, all eager to clarify that they maintain full confidence in your leadership and are ready to support the transition." "Transition," repeated Tyler thoughtfully. "Yes, it will be quite a transition." "And there's more," added Amanda, sliding to the next news item on her tablet. "We've just confirmed that the stock exchange has temporarily suspended trading of the company's shares to avoid excessive speculation. When it reopens, our financial analysts predict a significant recovery as soon as you formally announce your return to command." While the others discussed the next steps and the legal and financial implications of the events, Tyler felt Mac settling closer to him on the hospital bed, his warm body a comforting anchor amid the storm of emotions and decisions that approached. Stroking the Labrador's golden fur, Tyler allowed himself for the first time in days to really feel the weight of what had happened. It wasn't just Richard's betrayal, although that was a wound that would take a long time to heal, but also the perception of his own vulnerability and, paradoxically, of his strength. A week before, he was a successful businessman with a comfortable and predictable life. Now, after almost losing everything, including his life, he had emerged as a survivor, as someone who, even when cornered, had found internal resources he didn't know he possessed. "What do you think, Max?" he whispered to the dog, while the others continued their animated conversation. "Are we ready to rebuild?" In response, the Labrador raised his head and looked directly into Tyler's eyes, with that expression of absolute loyalty and unwavering confidence that only dogs can convey. It was all the encouragement he needed. "Amanda," he called, raising his voice to be heard over the general conversation, "I think I'm ready for that exclusive interview now." The journalist smiled, a professional but genuinely empathetic smile. "Excellent," she replied, already taking a small recorder from her pocket. "Where would you like to begin?" Tyler looked around the room, at Isabella, who had risked everything to help him, at Morgan and Robert, who had faced bureaucracy and danger in the name of justice, at Max, whose unconditional loyalty had literally saved his life and knew exactly how to respond. "From the beginning," he said with renewed conviction, and this time, the complete truth. 6 months had passed since that turbulent night in Newport Bay. The late afternoon sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, reflecting in the calm waters of the bay, while a new vessel majestically glided through the water on its inaugural voyage. On the bow, in elegant but discreet letters, the name could be read, Second Wind. On the main deck, Tyler Coleman observed the horizon, an untouched champagne flute in his hand. The launch event for the new school yacht of the Coleman Foundation was coming to an end, and the guests, a carefully selected mix of investors, company collaborators, authorities, and beneficiaries of the program, were beginning to say their goodbyes. Max, now sporting a navy blue bandana that matched the event's decoration, remained faithfully at Tyler's side, occasionally receiving distracted pets from guests who recognized the canine hero, as the press had affectionately nicknamed the Labrador. After the extensive coverage of the case, "Thinking about the past or planning for the future?" asked Isabella, approaching silently to join him in contemplating the sunset. Tyler smiled, turning to the friend who in recent months had become much more than just his secretary and confidant. As the new director of operations of the restructured Coleman Navigation, Isabella had been instrumental in transforming the company after the scandal. "A bit of both," he admitted. "It's hard to look at the sea and not think of everything that happened, but," he slightly raised his glass in a silent toast, "it's also impossible not to look ahead, especially today." The Second Wind wasn't just a new yacht, it was the tangible symbol of the vision Tyler had developed during his recovery. Part nautical school, part oceanographic research laboratory, the vessel would be primarily dedicated to educational programs for young people with physical disabilities, offering not just professional training, but the transformative experience that Tyler himself had lived after his accident. "The first students embark next week?" asked Isabella, although she already knew the answer. She herself had meticulously coordinated every detail of the program. "Yes, 15 young people for the pilot program," confirmed Tyler, his eyes shining with genuine enthusiasm. "All with incredible stories of overcoming, ready for a new chapter." On the other side of the deck, Dr. Marcia was animatedly conversing with Captain Torres, a Navy veteran who had accepted the invitation to lead the educational program. Isabella's cousin had become a regular collaborator of the foundation, bringing her medical expertise to adapt the training protocols to the specific needs of each participant. "I heard Detective Morgan was promoted," commented Isabella, subtly changing the subject. "Deservedly," replied Tyler. The Blackwell case ended up revealing connections with other corruption schemes in the maritime sector. Robert mentioned the investigations are still ongoing. The mention of the case inevitably brought thoughts about Richard. His trial was still in progress, complicated by the quantity of financial crimes discovered and the growing number of those involved. Christina Vega, who initially tried to present herself as an innocent, manipulated woman, eventually accepted a plea deal, revealing details that expanded the investigation even further. "Did you see the letter?" asked Isabella hesitantly, referring. "Out of the correspondence that Richard had sent from prison weeks ago." Tyler nodded silently. The letter, a strange mixture of veiled apologies, self-justification, and implicit requests for clemency, remained stored in his desk, partially read and completely unanswered. "I still haven't decided if I'll respond," he finally admitted. "Part of me wants to completely close this chapter. Another part wants to understand," completed Isabella softly, "what transformed decades of friendship into betrayal." "Exactly." Tyler finally took a sip of champagne. "But today is not a day to look back." As if to emphasize his point, Max suddenly became animated, wagging his tail vigorously while observing the approach of a small group. The first 5, students of the program, special guests for the launch event, accompanied by their families. Led by Julia, a 17-year-old girl who had lost both legs in a traffic accident 3 years earlier, the group advanced across the deck with the characteristic mixture of shyness and determination of adolescence. Julia, who had already demonstrated exceptional aptitude in the preliminary training on land, had quickly become the unofficial spokesperson for the group. "Mr. Coleman," she called, skillfully maneuvering her customized wheelchair, "we wanted to personally thank you before we leave. All of this is," she gestured broadly, encompassing the yacht and the horizon, "amazing, literally changing our lives." The knot that formed in Tyler's throat caught him by surprise. In the months of planning and intense work to transform the company and create the foundation, he rarely had time to really absorb the emotional impact of what he was building. "The pleasure is mine, Julia," he managed to respond. "You are the reason all of this exists." While the young woman formally introduced each of her colleagues, Tyler noticed how Max interacted differently with each teenager, gentler with the shyer ones, more playful with the more extroverted, confirming once again the extraordinary instinct of the animal for human needs. "Will he participate in the classes too?" asked Matthew, a 15-year-old boy with mild cerebral palsy, pointing to Max. "Definitely," replied Tyler, smiling. "In fact, he has just been officially certified as a therapy dog in addition to assistance. He will be an integral part of the program." After a few more minutes of animated conversation about the details of the course they would soon begin, the group said goodbye, leaving Tyler and Isabella once again alone on the deck that was now emptying, while the sun finally sank into the horizon, leaving a trail of gold over the waters. "Have you ever thought," began Isabella contemplatively, "that if none of that had happened, if Richard hadn't tried to get rid of you, if Max hadn't jumped to save you, if the Coast Guard boat hadn't been nearby, none of this would exist now?" Tyler observed the last golden reflection disappearing into the waters, giving way to the first gleam of stars in the rapidly darkening sky. "I think about it every day," he admitted, "how something so terrible could eventually create something so positive. Not just the foundation, but—" He briefly hesitated, his gaze meeting Isabella's. "New connections, new purposes, a second chance to do something truly meaningful." Unconsciously, his hand found hers on the railing. It wasn't the first time the gesture had happened in recent weeks, but this time neither of them hurried to break the contact. "To new beginnings," said Isabella softly, raising her glass with her free hand. "To second winds," replied Tyler, completing the toast. From across the deck, the crew was discreetly preparing for the return to the marina. The lights of Newport Beach were beginning to dot the coast, creating a necklace of lights that reflected in the now dark waters. The same sea that had almost taken his life now offered itself as a path to the future, not just for him, but for dozens of young people who would soon find their own new beginning in these waters. Max, as if perceiving the importance of the moment, approached and rested his head on Tyler's knee, looking alternately at his owner and at the horizon, as if asking, "And now, where do we go?" The answer was in the tranquil smile that Tyler shared with Isabella, in the gentle sway of the second wind over the gentle waves, and in the distant star that now shone with particular force, marking not an end, but a beginning. "Wherever the wind takes us, friend," replied Tyler, in a low voice, stroking the head of his faithful companion, "and this time we'll sail together."